Day 5 dawned with Jake no longer fighting for survival. He was teaching it. Vera had moved her shelter closer to his camp during the night after predator tracks appeared around her sleeping area. Even proud Zex Kala had swallowed his pride and asked for help building basic defenses. Jake's camp now looked like a small village. His original shelter had been expanded with additional rooms. One area stored water containers. Another held food supplies of dried cactus fruits and roasted seeds. A third section served as his workshop where he crafted tools from bones and desert materials. The most impressive addition was his fire pit system. Jake had built multiple fire stations around the camp connected by stone-lined trenches. During cold nights, he could light fires in sequence to keep the entire area warm. During hot days, he could control which fires burned to avoid overheating the camp. "Your grandfather taught you all of this?" Vera asked as Jake showed her how to make cordage strong enough to support shelter walls. "Some of it," Jake replied, his hands working automatically to twist cactus fibers together. "But mostly he taught me how to think about problems. Once you understand how materials work, you can figure out new ways to use them." Vera tried to copy his cordage technique. Her first attempts were clumsy, but she was learning fast. Her mixed human-saurian heritage gave her good hand control when she concentrated. "On my world, we have machines that make rope from synthetic materials. I never thought about how to make it from plants." "Machines are helpful," Jake said, "but they can break or run out of power. Knowledge stays with you forever." Zexkala approached them carrying an armload of flat stones. The Saurian had finally accepted that survival required more than just toughness. "Human, show me how to build. The fire pit like yours. My people need warmth at night, but I do not know your fire-making techniques." Jake set down his cordage work and walked over to examine the stones Zexkala had gathered. "These are good. You need different sizes, though. Large ones for the base, medium ones for the walls, small ones to fill gaps." He began showing the Saurian how to arrange stones for maximum heat reflection and minimum fuel use. The technique required understanding how air flowed through the fire pit to keep flames burning efficiently. "My ancestors used energy weapons," Zexkala said as he placed stones according to Jake's instructions. "We never needed to make fire by hand." "Energy weapons are powerful," Jake agreed. "But can you build one from cactus and bones?" Zexkala paused in his work and looked at Jake with new understanding. "No. I cannot even repair one if it breaks." Jake spent the morning teaching both Vera and Zexkala advanced survival techniques. He showed them how to identify animal trails and predict where predators might approach. He demonstrated food preservation methods using salt deposits found in dried lake beds. Most importantly, he taught them to work as a team. Desert survival was easier when people shared tasks and knowledge. Vera became expert at water procurement from various cactus types. Zexkala's strength made him good at gathering heavy materials like stones and large bones. Jake coordinated their efforts and handled the complex tool-making tasks. "This is not how the test was designed," Zexkala observed as they worked together. "To expand the camp's defensive perimeter, each cadet is supposed to survive alone." "The rules say we cannot use technology," Jake replied. "They do not say we cannot share knowledge. Teaching survival skills is not the same as giving someone food or water." By afternoon, their combined camp resembled a permanent settlement. Multiple shelters provided sleeping areas for each person, plus storage for supplies. The fire pit network could warm the entire camp or focus heat where needed. Water collection and storage systems could support them for weeks if necessary. The defensive improvements were the most sophisticated part. Jake had designed a series of barriers and early warning systems that would alert them to approaching animals from any direction. Sharp bone stakes created a fence around the camp perimeter. The chime system had been expanded to cover all approaches. "We could live here permanently," Vera said as she tested the flexibility of a new cordage design. "This camp has everything needed for long-term survival. My people would be impressed," Zexkala admitted as he practiced starting fires with Jake's friction method. "You have built a fortress from desert trash." Jake looked around at their work with satisfaction. But he also felt concerned about something. he had noticed during the day. "We are not the only ones being tested," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Vera asked. Jake pointed toward the sky where he had occasionally seen glints of reflected sunlight. "The instructors are watching everything we do. They are learning as much as we are." "Of course they watch," HFY said. "How else would they know if we succeed or fail?" "But they are studying our techniques too carefully," Jake replied. "I think this test is about more than just cadet survival. They want to understand human methods." That evening, Jake began working on his most complex project yet. He had found a large flat stone that would make an excellent work surface. Using his bone tools, he began carving a detailed map of the local area on the stone's surface. The map showed water sources, food locations, safe camping spots, and dangerous areas to avoid. Jake marked animal trails, predator territories, and seasonal changes in plant growth. The map included elevation markers made from small stone piles and direction indicators based on star positions. "This is like the navigation systems on our ships," Vera said as she watched Jake work on the stone map. "But it will never need repair or power. Maps like this helped my ancestors cross continents," Jake explained as he carved symbols representing different types of resources. Each symbol tells a story about what you can find in that area. HFY studied the growing map with tactical interest. "Your people think like warriors after all. This shows strategic positions, resource control, and defensive advantages. Survival is warfare against the environment," Jake replied. "The desert is our enemy. We win by knowing its weaknesses and using them against it." As night fell, their expanded camp showed its value. The multiple fire stations kept everyone warm without wasting fuel. The warning systems detected 3 different predator approaches, giving them time to prepare defenses. The improved shelters blocked wind and retained heat efficiently. Most importantly, the 3 cadets had learned to function as a survival unit. Each person contributed their strengths while learning new skills from the others. Vera's quick learning ability helped her master techniques fast. HFY's physical power made heavy work easier. Jake's knowledge and planning kept everyone focused on important tasks. 5 days complete, Jake announced as they settled down to sleep. 2 more days to finish the test, but he suspected the real test was just beginning. The instructors watching from orbit had seen human survival methods work better than advanced alien technology. They had observed cooperation replace competition among cadets from different species. The implications of those observations would extend far beyond a simple survival test. Jake fell asleep to the sound of his chimes moving gently in the desert. Wind. The warning systems had become so familiar that he could identify different types of desert animals just by listening to the patterns they created. The human was no longer just surviving in the desert, he was becoming part of it. The extraction ships arrived on day 7 to find something unprecedented in the history of the Galactic Military Academy survival trials. Instead of desperate cadets barely clinging to life, they found a thriving settlement complete with organized structures, defensive systems, and 3 cadets who looked healthier than when they started. Jake stood at the center of the camp, demonstrating fire-starting techniques to Vera and HFY. His students practiced eagerly, having learned to appreciate skills their civilizations had forgotten. The camp around them resembled a small town more than a temporary survival shelter. Commander Lisa Rodriguez stepped off the lead extraction ship and stared at the scene before her. She had monitored hundreds of survival tests over her career. Most ended with exhausted cadets huddled around failing shelters, desperate for rescue. This looked more like a wilderness training facility. "Cadet Martinez," she called as she approached the fire demonstration area. "Report your status." Jake stood and gave a proper military salute. "Day 7 survival test completed successfully, Commander. All remaining cadets are healthy and equipped for extended operations if required." "Extended operations?" Commander Rodriguez looked around the elaborate camp. "This was supposed to be a basic survival exercise." "Yes, Commander, but the desert provided everything needed for permanent settlement. We adapted our methods to match available resources." Commander Rodriguez walked through the camp with growing amazement. The water storage system could support a dozen people for months. Food preservation areas held supplies that would remain fresh in the desert climate. The defensive perimeters showed tactical thinking beyond basic survival needs. Extraordinary, she murmured, as she examined Jake's stone map. The carved surface showed detailed knowledge of the local area that would take survey teams weeks to compile. How did you gather this much information in 7 days? Daily scouting missions, Commander. Each morning I mapped new areas while searching for resources. The map grew larger each day as I learned more about the environment. Vera stepped forward. Commander, the human taught us survival techniques our species had forgotten. His methods work better than our technology in this environment. Zexkala nodded agreement. I doubted primitive skills could match advanced equipment. I was wrong. The human's knowledge proved superior when technology was removed. Commander Rodriguez turned to her monitoring team. Show me the complete recordings of this test. I want to see everything from day one. The next hours passed in intense review. Jake and his companions demonstrated their techniques while the monitoring team recorded everything. Water procurement from various cactus species, tool making from bones and desert materials, shelter construction using organic frameworks, fire, starting with friction methods. Most impressive was the teaching process. Jake had not just survived alone, he had created a learning environment where alien cadets from different species worked together effectively. The cooperation between human, half-saurian, and pure saurian showed possibilities that military planners had not considered. These techniques need to be documented for academy training programs, Commander Rodriguez told her staff. Every cadet should learn these basic skills regardless of their species' technology level. Jake overheard the comment and approached the commander. Respectfully, Commander, these are not just techniques. They represent a different way of thinking about problems. Technology can fail, but knowledge and adaptability last forever. Explain. What you mean, Cadet? Jake gestured toward his camp. Every structure here was built using materials the desert provided. When we needed water, we found it in plants. When we needed tools, we made them from bones. When we needed shelter, we used rocks and dried cactus. The desert itself became our supply depot. Your companion species possess superior physical capabilities, Commander Rodriguez observed. Saurian strength, Vorthan environmental resistance, Klaxon armor plating. Yet they failed while you succeeded. Why? Physical advantages help, Jake replied, but mental flexibility matters more. When your standard approach does not work, you need to try different methods. My people learned this because Earth forced us to adapt or die. Vera joined the conversation. Commander, I learned more about survival in 7 days with Jake than in 4 years of academy classes. Our advanced training focused on using equipment and following procedures. Jake taught us to solve problems with whatever materials we can find. The extraction process took longer than usual because the monitoring team wanted complete documentation of the camp. They recorded construction details, tool-making processes, and resource identification methods. Jake's stone map was carefully transported to the ship for detailed study. As the ships prepared to leave Zirion Prime, Jake took a final look at the desert that had tested him. The landscape looked different now. Instead of hostile wasteland, he saw a challenging but manageable environment full of useful resources. Will you miss it? Vera asked as they boarded the extraction ship. No, Jake replied. But I learned something important here. Humans are not stronger or smarter than other species, but we are good at adapting to new situations and finding unexpected solutions. The debriefing sessions aboard the Academy ship lasted for days. Jake's survival manual, compiled from his test experience, became required reading for all survival instructors. His techniques were tested by expert teams and found to work reliably in various desert environments across the galaxy. More importantly, the test results changed Academy training philosophy. Previous survival courses had focused on using approved equipment and following established procedures. Jake's success showed the value of creative problem-solving and adaptation to local conditions. The Martinez method entered official Academy doctrine within months. New cadets learned basic tool-making, resource identification, and shelter construction, regardless of their species' technological capabilities. The courses emphasized mental flexibility and creative thinking over rigid adherence to standard procedures. Jake received commendation from the Academy's highest authorities. His survival demonstration had proven that human adaptability could contribute significantly to galactic military capabilities. More human instructors were recruited for survival training programs, but the greatest honor came from his fellow cadets. Vera requested assignment to Earth's wilderness training programs to learn more human survival techniques. Zexkala abandoned his genetic supremacist views and became an advocate for multi-species cooperation. Other cadets who had failed the test asked for additional training in human-style problem-solving methods. "You changed how we think about survival," Vera told Jake during his graduation ceremony. "Not just staying alive, but thriving in any environment." Jake accepted his commission as the Academy's youngest survival instructor. His first assignment was developing training programs that taught alien species to think like humans when faced with resource limitations. "Survival is not about having the best equipment," Jake told his first class of mixed species cadets. "It is about understanding your environment and using everything it offers. The galaxy is full of worlds that will challenge you. Learn to see opportunity where others see only problems." His students came from dozens of worlds with technologies beyond human imagination, but they all learned to start fires with friction, find water in desert plants, and build shelters from local materials. More importantly, they learned to approach problems with human-style creativity and adaptability. The desert trial had proven something important about humanity's place in the galaxy. Physical strength and advanced technology were valuable, but mental flexibility and adaptability were irreplaceable. When standard methods failed, humans found new ways to succeed. Jake's success opened doors for greater human integration into galactic institutions. Military commanders who had dismissed humans as technologically inferior began requesting human advisors for survival and adaptation training. Human methods were studied and adopted across multiple species military programs. The boy who learned camping skills from his grandfather had become the teacher who showed the galaxy a different way to think about survival. In the process, he had proven that humanity's greatest strength was not any single ability, but the willingness to learn, adapt, and find solutions where others saw only problems. The desert had tested Jake Martinez and found him ready for whatever challenges the galaxy might offer. Jake Morrison walked down the long glass hallway of the Zephyrian Academy of Galactic Sciences. His worn boots made soft sounds on the smooth floor while alien students floated, slithered, and walked around him. Some had 6 legs, others had no legs at all. A few had wings that sparkled like diamonds in the bright light from the twin suns outside. Jake was one of only 12 humans at the academy. The other students came from all over the galaxy. They had been born with amazing powers that humans could only dream about. Some could shoot lightning from their hands. Others could turn their skin as hard as metal. A few could read minds or see through walls, but Jake was just human. He had 2 arms, 2 legs, and a brain that worked pretty well. That was all. The academy was the most important school in the galaxy. If you graduated from here, your whole planet got to join the Galactic Federation. That meant trade deals, new technology, and protection from space pirates. It also meant respect from the thousands of alien races that ruled the stars. Humans had been trying to get into the Federation for 50 years. Earth had sent their best and brightest students to the academy. Most failed the entrance exam. A few made it inside but dropped out when the classes got too hard. Jake was different. He had made it to his final year. His roommate was a creature named Crix from the water world of Aquarius Prime. Crix looked like a giant octopus with blue skin and silver eyes. He could create powerful electric shocks with his tentacles. When Crix got angry, which happened a lot, small lightning bolts would dance around his body. "Human Jake," Crix said in his bubbling voice as Jake entered their shared room. "Tomorrow is the final exam. Are you ready to fail and bring shame to your primitive species?" Jake sat on his bed and pulled off his boots. "I guess we will find." "How tomorrow?" Crix laughed. The sound was like water going down a drain. "You have no natural weapons, no armor, no special powers. The Shadow Maw will eat you in the first hour. The Shadow Maw was the monster that every student had to face in the final exam. It lived on a dead moon called Zerion 7. The creature was 12 feet tall with claws that could cut through steel. Its thick black skin could stop bullets. Its teeth were as long as kitchen knives. For 300 years, students had faced the Shadow Maw. Many died. Some ran away and were kicked out of school. Only the strongest and smartest survived the 3-day test. Jake had studied every report about the Shadow Maw. He knew it was fast, smart, and almost impossible to kill. Most students tried to fight it with their natural powers. The lucky ones managed to hurt it enough to make it go away for a while. The unlucky ones became its dinner. "Tell me, Crix," Jake said while putting his boots in the closet, "how many students have actually killed a Shadow Maw?" Crix's tentacles stopped moving. His silver eyes got bigger. "Killed one? That is not the point of the test. You just have to survive for 3 days. But some must have killed it over 300 years, right?" "Well," Crix said slowly, "there are stories. Maybe 5 or 6 students have actually killed one, but they were all from the warrior races. The Dragoni with their fire breath, the Christians with their sonic screams, species with real power." Jake nodded. He had read those same stories. Each time a student killed a Shadow Maw, they became famous across the galaxy. Their species got special treatment in the Federation. Their homeworlds became centers of trade and learning. But no human had ever killed a Shadow Maw. No human had even come close. The next morning, all the final year students gathered in the Great Hall. There were 43 of them from 22 different worlds. They sat on floating seats that adjusted to each alien body type. Professor Vex, the head of the academy, stood at the front. He was a Zephyrian, which meant he looked like a walking crystal sculpture. His body was made of some kind of living diamond that caught the light and threw rainbows around the room. When he spoke, his voice sounded like wind chimes. "Students," Professor Vex said, "today you take the final exam. You will go to Zerion 7 and face the Shadow Maw. The rules are simple. No weapons, no technology, no communication devices. You have only your natural abilities and whatever you can make from materials on the moon." A student named Yal raised one of her 4 arms. She was from a desert planet and could create sonic waves that could shatter glass. "Professor, what if we work together? You may not help each other. Each student faces the test alone. You have 3 days. If you are still alive when the rescue ships arrive, you pass." Another student asked about the weather on Zerion 7. Professor Vex explained that it was hot during the day and freezing at night. There was very little water. The air was thin but breathable. Most of the moon was bare rock with some tough plants growing in the cracks. "Are there any other dangerous animals?" asked Zed, a student with green scales and poison spit. "The Shadow Maw is the only large predator. But there are smaller creatures. Rock worms that can bite through metal, flying insects that hunt in swarms, poisonous plants that look like safe ones." Jake listened carefully to every word. While his classmates asked about the obvious dangers, Jake was thinking about other things. What kind of rocks were on Zerion 7? What did the plants look like? How deep were the canyons? "Human Jake," Professor Vex said suddenly. "Do you have any questions?" All the other students turned to look at him. Some were already laughing. They thought it was funny that a human was even here. "Yes, Professor," Jake said. "Can you tell us more about the geology of Zerion 7? What minerals are common there?" The laughing got louder. Professor Vex's crystal face showed confusion. "Geology? Why would you need to know about rocks, human Jake?" "Just curious," Jake said with a small smile. Professor Vex made a sound like breaking glass, which Jake had learned was Zephyrian laughter. "Very well. The moon is mostly granite and basalt. There are deposits of iron ore and some limestone caves. Various common minerals can be found throughout the surface layer." Jake nodded and wrote this down in his notebook. His classmates thought this was the funniest thing they had ever seen. A human taking notes about rocks before facing a monster that could tear him apart. But Jake was not worried about what they thought. He had a plan forming in his mind. It was not a plan that any of his classmates would understand. They relied on their natural weapons and powers. Jake would have to rely on something else entirely, something that humans had been very good at for a very long time. The transport ships arrived that afternoon. Each student got into a separate pod that would drop them at different locations on Zarion 7. As Jake climbed into his pod, he heard Crix call out to him, "Goodbye, human Jake, try not to die too quickly." Jake waved back. "See you in 3 days, Crix." But as his pod launched toward the deadly moon, Jake was already thinking about rocks and plants and the many ways that simple things could become very dangerous in the right hands. Jake's pod hit the ground of Zarion 7 with a loud crash. Red dust flew everywhere as the small ship bounced twice before sliding to a stop against a large boulder. The door hissed open, and hot air rushed in, carrying the smell of metal and dry earth. Jake stepped out and looked around. The land was like a giant desert made of red rock. Tall cliffs rose up on both sides of him, creating a narrow canyon that stretched far into the distance. The twin suns burned overhead, making everything glow orange and gold. His pod would disappear in 1 hour, taking away his only connection to the academy. After that, he would be completely alone on this dead world with the most dangerous creature in the galaxy. Jake did not waste time feeling sorry for himself. He had work to do. The first thing he did was walk around the landing area in growing circles, looking at everything carefully. Most people would be searching for weapons or places to hide. Jake was looking for different things. He found what he needed within the first few minutes. Near the base of the cliff wall, there were loose rocks of different sizes and types. Some were smooth and round, perfect for throwing. Others had sharp edges that could cut. A few were the right shape and weight to use as hammers. Jake picked up a piece of gray rock and struck it against another stone. Sparks flew out. Fire-making rock. He smiled and put several pieces in his pockets. Next, he examined the plants growing in the cracks between rocks. Most were small and twisted, fighting for life in this harsh place. But Jake found what he was looking for: tough, flexible stems that could be woven into rope, sharp thorns that could be used as needles or small spear points, sticky sap that could help glue things together. While Jake collected materials, he could hear sounds echoing from other parts of the moon. A loud roar came from somewhere to the north. That was probably Zed using his poison spit to fight something. From the east came the sound of breaking rock. That might be Yal using her sonic powers. Jake heard a scream that ended suddenly. One of his classmates had already failed the test. He kept working. From his studies, Jake knew that most students tried to find the Shadow Maw and fight it as quickly as possible. They wanted to get the dangerous part over with. This usually ended badly for them. Jake had a different plan. He was going to let the Shadow Maw find him, but only when he was ready. The canyon where Jake had landed was perfect for what he wanted to do. It had high walls on both sides with only a few ways in or out. The floor was covered with loose rocks and boulders of all sizes. A small stream of water ran down the middle, which meant this was probably a path that animals used to travel across the moon. Jake spent his first day learning everything about his new home. He mapped out every rock, every crack in the walls, every plant that might be useful. He found 3 caves, 2 of which were too small to be useful. The third was just the right size for a person to hide in, but too small for something as big as the Shadow Maw. As the sun started to set, the temperature began to drop fast. Jake had prepared for this by gathering dry plant material and building a small fire in a protected spot between 2 large rocks. The flames would keep him warm and also let him work on his projects after dark. By the light of the fire, Jake began making tools. First, he selected the best stones for throwing. He wanted them to be heavy enough to cause damage but light enough to throw accurately. He practiced throwing them at targets until he could hit a mark the size of a dinner plate from 50 feet away. Next, he began carving a piece of wood he had found. It was from a dead tree that had once grown in the canyon. The wood was hard and dry, perfect for what Jake had in mind. He used sharp rocks to shape it carefully, testing the balance and weight as he worked. What Jake was making would have looked like a simple stick to most people, but he knew it was something much more. Important. It was called an atlatl, a tool that humans had used for thousands of years to make their spears fly faster and hit harder. Jake had learned about the atlatl in a history class back on Earth. His teacher had said it was one of the most important inventions in human history. It let early humans hunt animals much larger than themselves. It made their weak arms as powerful as the legs of a running horse. While Jake worked on his throwing stick, he listened to the sounds of the night. Zerion 7 was not as quiet as it looked. Strange clicking sounds came from the rocks around him, probably the rock worms that Professor Vex had mentioned. Something that sounded like wind chimes came from high up on the canyon walls. Flying insects, maybe, and once, just before midnight, Jake heard something else, a low growling sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It made the hair on the back of his neck stand up, and his heart beat faster. The shadow maw was out there, and it was hunting. Jake put more wood on his fire and kept working. Fear would not help him now. Only careful preparation would give him a chance to survive. On his second day, Jake began the hardest part of his plan. He was going to turn the entire canyon into a trap. He started by studying the way water flowed down the canyon when it rained. There were marks on the rocks that showed where the water had cut channels over many years. Jake followed these channels and found what he was looking for, places where the rock was softer and where the ground might collapse if enough weight was put on it. Using his stone tools, Jake began digging and scraping at these weak spots. It was slow, hard work under the burning suns. His hands got cut and his back ached, but he kept going. He was making the ground even weaker, so that something heavy stepping on it would fall through. But Jake did not want to just make holes in the ground. He wanted to make them deadly. He spent hours sharpening long pieces of wood and stone into spears. Then he planted these spears at the bottom of his holes, pointing upward. Anyone or anything that fell in would land on the sharp points. Jake covered his pit traps with thin layers of rock and dirt, then scattered normal-looking stones on top. From above, they looked like solid ground, but they would not support the weight of a 12-foot monster. Next, Jake worked on his deadfall traps. These were simpler, but just as dangerous. He found places where he could balance very heavy rocks, above narrow passages. Thin trip lines made from plant fibers would cause the rocks to fall when something walked through. The deadfall traps were not meant to kill the shadow maw. Jake doubted that even a ton of falling rock would do more than make it angry, but they would slow it down and force it to move where Jake wanted it to go. By the end of the second day, Jake had turned the canyon into a maze of hidden dangers. He had also prepared escape routes for himself, narrow cracks in the rock walls that he could squeeze through, but that would be too small for the shadow maw. As the sun set again, Jake heard more sounds from around the moon. Another scream, this one lasting longer. Someone else had failed the test. Jake tried not to think about which of his classmates it might have been. He also heard something else that made him smile. From the west came the sound of something large, crashing through rocks. Something angry and frustrated. The shadow maw had probably found one of the other students and was not having an easy time catching them. Good. That meant it was getting tired and angry. Tired and angry creatures made mistakes. Jake spent his second night finishing his weapons. In addition to the atlatl, he had made a sling for throwing rocks and several spears with fire-hardened points. He had also prepared bundles of sharp stones that could be thrown to create confusion and pain. But his most important weapon was not made of wood or stone. It was the knowledge he had gained about his battlefield. Jake knew every rock, every crack, every weak spot in the canyon. When the shadow maw came for him, it would be entering his territory, where he made the rules. On the morning of the third day, Jake heard what he had been waiting for, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing off the canyon walls. Something big was coming down the path toward his camp. Jake quickly put out his fire and scattered the ashes. He gathered his weapons and moved to his first fighting position, a spot behind a large boulder where he could see the entire canyon floor. The footsteps got louder. Then they stopped. Jake waited, barely breathing. He could feel eyes watching him, even though he could not see anything moving in the canyon. The shadow maw had arrived, and now the real test would begin. Jake crouched behind the boulder and waited. The canyon had gone completely quiet. Even the small sounds of insects and wind had stopped, as if the whole moon was holding its breath. Then he saw it. The shadow maw stepped around a bend in the canyon wall like a nightmare made real. It was bigger than Jake had imagined, standing at least 12 feet tall on its back legs. Its skin was so black it seemed to absorb light. Thick plates of natural armor covered its chest and back. Its arms were longer than Jake's whole body, ending in claws that looked like curved swords, but the worst part was its head. The shadow maw had a skull like a giant wolf, but with too many teeth. Its eyes glowed yellow in the shadow of the canyon walls. When it opened its mouth, Jake could see rows of teeth going back into its throat. The creature moved down the canyon slowly, testing each step. Its head turned back and forth, searching for threats. This was not some mindless beast. The shadow maw was smart, and it had learned to be careful after 300 years of fighting academy students. Jake watched as the monster approached his first trap. It was a deadfall designed to block the narrow part of the canyon and force the shadow maw to take a different path. The creature stopped just before the trip line and tilted its head, studying the rocks above. With one clawed hand, the shadow maw reached out and deliberately triggered the trap. Tons of rock came crashing down, filling the passage with dust and broken stone. The creature watched this happen without moving, then found another way around the blocked path. Jake felt his heart sink. The shadow maw had figured out his traps just by looking at them. This was going to be much harder than he had hoped. But Jake did not give up. He had prepared for this possibility. The deadfall trap had not been meant to kill the shadow maw. Graius had been meant to test how smart the creature really was. Now Jake knew what he was dealing with. The shadow maw continued down the canyon, avoiding 2 more traps by walking around them. But Jake had been counting on this. Every time the creature avoided one trap, it was forced to step closer to another one. Finally, the shadow maw reached a point where there was no way around Jake's hidden pit trap. The creature would have to walk across the weak ground or turn around and leave the canyon entirely. Jake held his breath as the monster approached the covered pit. This trap was his best work, hidden so well that even he had trouble seeing where the solid ground ended and the fake ground began. The shadow maw put one massive foot on the hidden pit. The ground held. It shifted its weight forward and took another step. The false floor collapsed. The shadow maw roared as it fell into the pit, but its incredible reflexes saved it from the worst damage. Instead of falling straight down onto Jake's spears, it managed to grab the edge of the pit with its claws and haul itself back up. But it did not escape completely unhurt. 2 of Jake's sharpened stakes had caught the creature in the leg inside, leaving dark blood flowing down its black skin. Now the shadow maw was angry. It threw back its head and let out a sound that made Jake's bones shake. The roar echoed off the canyon walls and seemed to go on forever. When it finally stopped, the creature began moving much faster, no longer worried about traps. Jake knew it was time to run. He slipped out from behind his boulder and began moving through the maze of rocks and passages he had prepared. Behind him, the shadow maw smashed through his carefully built defenses like they were made of paper. Jake reached his second fighting position, just as the creature rounded the corner behind him. This spot was at the base of a steep cliff where loose rocks could be triggered to fall. Jake grabbed his sling and loaded it with one of his carefully chosen stones. The sling was another ancient human weapon. Like the atlatl, it used physics to make a weak human arm much more powerful. Jake had practiced with slings since he was a boy back on Earth. He whipped the sling around his head and released the stone. It flew through the air and struck the shadow maw right between the eyes. The creature stumbled backward, more surprised than hurt. Jake did not wait to see what happened next. He triggered his rock slide and began climbing up the cliff face using handholds he had prepared earlier. Behind him, tons of stone crashed down into the canyon. But when the dust cleared, the shadow maw was still there. A few cuts on its armored hide showed where the falling rocks had hit, but it was far from beaten. The creature looked up at Jake on the cliff and did something that made Jake's blood run cold. It smiled, showing all those terrible teeth. Then it began to climb. Jake had not expected this. He had thought the shadow maw was too big and heavy to follow him up the narrow cliff face. but the creature's claws could find holds in rock that looked completely smooth. It climbed like a giant spider, moving up the wall almost as fast as Jake could move. Jake reached a narrow ledge and grabbed his atlatl and one of his spears. The throwing stick felt light in his hands, but he knew it would multiply the power of his throw by 10 times. The Shadow Maw was only 30 feet below him now, climbing steadily upward. Its yellow eyes were fixed on Jake, and that horrible smile never left its face. Jake took careful aim and threw his spear with all his strength. The atlatl worked perfectly. The spear flew like a bullet, striking the Shadow Maw in the shoulder with tremendous force. The creature roared in pain and nearly lost its grip on the cliff wall, but it did not fall. Instead, it grabbed the spear with its free hand and pulled it out of its shoulder. Then it threw the spear back at Jake like a javelin. Jake barely had time to duck. The spear struck the cliff face just inches from his head, embedding itself so deeply in the rock that only the end stuck out. The message was clear. The Shadow Maw could throw just as well as Jake could. Jake scrambled along the narrow ledge, looking for his next escape route. He found it in a crack in the cliff wall that led to a series of caves he had explored earlier. The opening was just wide enough for a person, but too narrow for the Shadow Maw to follow. Jake squeezed through the crack and found himself in a small cave. This connected to other caves through passages that were sometimes so narrow Jake had to crawl on his belly to get through them. It was a perfect escape route as long as the Shadow Maw could not find another way in. Jake made his way through the cave system until he reached an opening on the other side of the cliff. From here, he could see back down into the canyon where his battle with the Shadow Maw had begun. The creature was no longer on the cliff face. Jake could see it moving through the canyon below, searching for his trail. It moved differently now, favoring the leg that had been injured by the pit trap spears. The spear wound in its shoulder was still bleeding. Jake was hurting it, but not fast enough. He needed to do more damage, and he was running out of prepared traps and weapons. But Jake had one more advantage that the Shadow Maw did not know about yet. He had studied not just the canyon but the entire area around it. He knew where every cave led, every passage connected, every weak spot in the rock could be found. The Shadow Maw was trapped in Jake's territory, but it did not know this yet. Jake began moving through the upper caves toward his final fighting position. This was where he would make his last stand. He had saved his best ideas for this moment. As he moved through the darkness, Jake could hear the Shadow Maw below, smashing rocks as it searched for him. The creature was getting more and more frustrated. Good. Frustrated enemies made bigger mistakes. Jake reached his final cave and began setting up his last trap. This one was different from all the others. Instead of trying to hurt the Shadow Maw, Jake was going to try something that no other student had ever attempted. He was going to bring the whole mountain down on top of it. The cave Jake had chosen was at the base of a cliff that had been weakened by thousands of years of wind and weather. Jake had spent hours studying the cracks in the rock, learning which ones went deep and which ones were just surface scratches. Using his stone tools, Jake began working on the largest crack. He hammered and scraped and dug, making the crack wider and deeper. It was dangerous work. If he made a mistake, the whole cliff would come down on him instead of the Shadow Maw. Outside, the creature had found the cave entrance. Jake could hear it roaring and clawing at the rocks, trying to make the opening bigger. But the passage was solid stone, and even the Shadow Maw's incredible strength could not break through quickly. Jake kept working on his crack. Pieces of rock fell around him as the cliff face became more and more unstable. Just a little more, and the whole thing would come crashing down. The sound of breaking rock came from the cave entrance. The Shadow Maw was making progress. Jake made one final strike with his stone hammer. The crack opened wide, running all the way up the cliff face, like a giant lightning bolt. The mountain began to fall.